it's Angie from Canterbury Trails Farm, and today I'm going to show you how to loom knit a winter bonnet. This is sort of like an alternative hat, and you may have seen these in catalogs, and if you're as old as I am, you may remember wearing them more as children. They were very common from the 50s to the 70s, and what it is, this is a child size one. It's just like goes over the top of the head, and it tied under your chin. A lot of times you would wear these, if you had like a coat that had a hood, you could wear these under it. Sometimes if you wear in cold enough climates, you'd wear these under your hat, under your hood, because they pulled down tight over your ears and you tie them under your chin. So this is a good, if you are working on a daily basis and you have to walk to work, or you're outside for any amount of time and you don't want your hair to get messed up by pulling a hat over it. This is a good alternative to wear under a hood. Now, this is a kid one, so it's not going to come all the way down, but it ties under. You can use the round loom, and this is the next to the smallest size that comes with the standard sets. It's about a 7.5 loom, and I did this child one on the round loom, and so you can see that this is a repeating pattern type of yarn, and it does a wider loop. And so what I did was a tube, and it's two-sided, and then I went through and sewed this like together with the same yarn to keep it from like separating, and so it's a double thickness, and so it's nice and warm. And then just going to braid some yarn together to make our straps or our ties under our chin. For the child size one, and I'd say this would fit probably from age 2 maybe to probably about age 5, depending on the size of your kiddo's head. I knitted for approximately, if we give allowance for the cinching, probably about 13 to 14 inches on the next to the smallest loom. And when I got to the ends, I just slightly cinched them, and then I sewed it using the same yarn, just did a whip stitch over the ends, and then I went through and just did stitched in lines up and down just to secure it all together. And we'll look on how to do the pom-poms after we finish the adult one, and you'll get a better idea. So that is on the round loom. So those were the measurements for that. I did not do an adult one on the round loom, but you could, just using the same measurements that we're going to use using this other. For the adult size one, I'm making for myself, and I love this yarn. It's from Universal Yarns, and it's Uptown Worsted Tapestry, and it has a repeating pattern. And when you do it on the tighter loom, like I did this one, you actually get this sort of Fair Isle sort of effect with the different rows and the different patterns in between. And you can see doing it on the round loom, same yarn. On the round loom, you're going to get more, you don't get this detailed pattern in between, and you're going to get more space between your repeating rows. But it still gives a nice striped effect, even if you are doing it on that round loom. I really like using the smaller pegged loom. For instance, on the round loom, you have 2 pegs per inch. On this smaller sock loom that I'm using, is an adjustable sock loom. But on this one, you get 4 pegs to an inch. So you're going to get a tighter knitting than you would on that round hat, the round loom, or hat loom is what I usually call them, but the round loom, because you're only going to get 2 pegs to an inch. So your weaving is going to be a lot looser and bigger stitches, and this is going to give you a tight stitch. So I'll show you how to do the stitch. I just did, like I always say in all of my videos, all of my projects are just the E-wrap stitch. That's all I use is the E-wrap stitch. And I have knitted for approximately 20 inches on this one. And now I'm giving myself, when I take this off the loom, it might end up that it's a little bigger, and that's okay, because I'm going to fold in and cinch the ends, and so that way if it's a little larger, you can tuck it in and make it fit you better. If it's too short and you've already taken it off the loom, then you're sort of stuck with something that isn't going to fit you unless you can find a way to maybe sew something onto the end, because it's really hard. I've done it, but once you take it off the loom, It's really hard to get it back on the loom. It can be done, but it's very time consuming and tedious, and sometimes you can tell that there was something that went on. But I think 20 inches is going to give you ample allowance to reach below your earlobes. We're going to look at how I did it real quick. I'm not going to go into how to loom knit as much as I am how to construct it. I will show you the simple E-wrap stitch. Do one row just to show you how to do the E-wrap stitch. So let's just look at the E-wrap stitch. The E-wrap stitch is just simply wrapping it around, and it looks like a lowercase e. I learned it in the 70s as the stockinette stitch. Here we're going to just wrap it around, doing the loop. And you'll see that let me get it around here, it'll be easier to see. So your separated loops will be on the outside of your loom. And then on the inside you'll see where they are sort of like wrapping around. So you want the separated ones on the outside of your loom. I know sometimes that can be the confusing part to beginning. It's like, which way do I do the wrapping on the outside or the inside? So I'm going to go all the way around, just wrapping it around, just like just going around it. That's all you're doing, all the way around. And you want to pick up the loop and pull it over. Now, if you are watching this and you are knitting for the first time, and because if you notice I already started, obviously the project was already in transition here. To start the first row, you have to do 2 rows around. So you wrap it once and then go around and wrap it again. And then you can start this part. After you get that initial 2 rows done, you're just building on top of each row. But to start out, you have to have 2 rows, obviously, because you have to have something to pull the loops over. So let me get back over to this other side here because it's easier to see the longer end. You're going to just get your hook under the bottom loop, the one that's closest to the base of your loom, and you're just going to pull it over the other loop that was there because you had 2 rows, and you're going to release it. Slide it under, pick it up, pull it over. So you're going to be left with the top row will now be your only row. And you go all the way around. Now we are going to take it off of the loom. When I take things off of the loom, I like to make sure that I leave a lot of yarn to work with, and in this case we're going to be cinching it up and sewing it, so just to sort of, it's easier to cut off extra than it is to tie on more, so always err on the side of too much. I would say probably one of these took 1 skein. I was using a bunch of skeins that I had already started for one reason or the other, so but I would say probably 1 skein. Alright, so how do we take it off the loom? I use these very long, thick steel upholstery needles because to me the plastic ones, I put a lot of force on them and I tend to just snap them in half after a little bit of time. And sometimes they also will break when you're slipping them under the loop and pushing against the pegs. So how do you take it off? Same way when you're doing your knitting, you put your hook or your needle under the loop, lift it up, pull it off onto your yarn. I'm going to go all the way around. I'm not cinching it right now, I'm just taking it off. Okay, when you get off the loom, let's cinch it up, and I'm going to try to just make it as flat as possible there. And now I want to go over the top, doing a whip stitch. And I'm going to cut that off. I'm going to go do this other side. Okay, and before I cinch it up on my head, and make sure it is where I want it. If you want it a little shorter, then you can tuck in this in to make it shorter, but I think that's good. Because remember, it will shrink too once it gets washed. So always an error a little bit on the too long, too big side, because it's going to shrink up when you wash it the first time. So now that I have that, I'm just going to cinch it up. I'm going to stick all these tails in there. When I get to the center, I just want to take my yarn and just in and out. I'm going to go towards the center to the opposite end, and this is just to hold it all together. So your tube, because remember it's a tube, so this is going to secure it into one piece of fabric. So this. Also help when you wash it. If you leave it a tube without securing it together like this, when you wash it, it could do some twisty turnies on you. If you run out of yarn, you can just tie the piece together and poke your knot inside of the weave. You don't want to cinch it, so if you feel like you're cinching, just pull it straight again. The only purpose of this is to keep these layers together. Go ahead and do a third side if you want to. If it was doing it for a kid, I would go ahead and do one more, just the more the better, but I think that's fine. Well, we're going to braid it, so it will take up some. So I'm going to start out, I think, with 17 inches long, because we need to have some that we'll put up here. Now on the other one, I sewed it on the top and I put the pom-pom on the top, so we're going to have to sort of weave it in somehow. So I did each part, so you need 3, you know, you're doing a braid, so you need 3, but I did each one as 3 there, so you need 9 links. On the uneven side, I'm going to come up here with another smaller piece. I'm going to tie off the very top. And I have this awesome vintage braid clamp that is used for making, well, anything you're using braids with, really. If you don't have a braid clamp, a vise, just any old small, like clamp, C-clamp, would work fine. Just clamp it down onto your ends of your braids. Set that aside for a minute, and I'm going to make my second one. Okay, I have my 2 ties. I'm going to find a spot in the middle, and I'm sort of using my hook to like loosen up a couple stitches here. I'm just going to cram this in there. When it's in there, my yarn again, and if you remember, we can't tie a knot like normal, so I'm going to go through. I'm going through the tie, down through the fabric, and coming back up here, and I'm going to tie this in a tight knot. And I'm going to tie it in another knot just to make sure. Now I'm going to continue to sew through that tie. Give it a good tug. It's better for it to come off when I'm making it than wearing it. So here, and do the same thing on this side. Alright, and we have both ties on. And it ties like this. I don't ever tie it in a bow. You could tie it in a bow if you want to just tie it in a knot. And then it's great for when you put your hood over, and also, you know, it pushes your hair down flat instead of the pulling the hat over it messing all up, and then when you pull your hat off. This way, when you undo it, you just lift it off your hair and it doesn't mess it up. Alright, so I'm not going to put pom-poms on this one. So how do you make a pom-pom? Let's go buy nifty little craft machines now that do the same thing as a piece of cardboard does. I have always just used the cardboard. I made a square 3.5 by 3.5, and you just want to wrap it. The thicker you wrap it, the thicker your pom-pom will be. There's some more in. Let's do a few. There we go. A few pieces. I made out of this one. I made two, and then I joined them together. Is what I did. And I'll show you why. I crisscrossed them so they would lay flat against each other on the hat. So just take the center and tie it, a piece of yarn under there, tie it tight. And go on the other side, do the same thing. Alright, so we have it tied on both sides. And we're just going to go up here at the top. We're going to cut it through the top of all the yarn. I have two small pom-poms. Now you can make a big fat one if you want to, but what I did was I want it to be round as possible. So I'm going to take the one pom-pom, it's tied this way, and I'm going to turn this one horizontally. Then I'm just going to sew through with my yarn again, the very center, and then I'm just going to tie them together. And I would leave an extra long piece here, so then I can attach this to the needle. See if I can fluff it up. See, so it's round all the way around. And then I would take it and sew it through my hat, this one. So leave a longer tail than that if you can, of yarn that you use to tie it all together with. And then you can just sew it on top of each end. A really cute and simple winter bonnet, which ended up about 19.5 inches long for the adult one after we cinched it all, and the child one ended up being about 14 inches long when it was all cinched up. So I would say aim for 20 when you're knitting a 20-inch tube. And this one, just in case you want to know, measures 5.5 inches wide. The child one measures 6 inches wide. And remember, when you wash it up, this one will probably shrink tighter because it has the looser weave. This one is going to shrink up, and that is why I think it's important to make sure you do those stitches through it, down from end to end, just to hold it all together. The weight of the yarn that I used was a 4. This has been Angie from Canterbury Trails Farm. Thanks for joining us today.